Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to discuss about what exactly is a class variable. Class variables are the variables which remains constant across all the objects. I'm pretty much sure with the definition you have not understood anything. Let me explain with a simple example. Let's say for example, I want to define a calculator. I'll just call class name as a calci and then I'll say A equals 10 and I'll say B equals 20. Okay, and then I'll define a method add. So function always comes with a default parameter which is self, which basically helps you in accessing variables defined within a class, right? So you have to call it using self.a plus self.b, right? And then now I'm going to create an object. C1 is equal to, I'm going to create it with the help of plan, which is a calci, right? And I'll create second object, C2 is equal to calci. Now, if I try to call C1.add and C2.add, can you tell me what you will get it? Will you get the same answer? C1.add is also 30, C2.add is also 30. So from this, what I can conclude, variables that are defined within a class are basically called as a class variables. Variables defined within a class are basically the class variables. A and B are the class variables which are defined within a class. And this class variables remains same across all the object. Create any number of objects, your A is going to be 10 and your B is going to be 20. And every time you create a different calces, so it's going to give us addition of two numbers is going to be 30. That is a class variable. Did you understand? Class variables are the variables which remains constant across all the objects. So this is one of the boring thing, right? If you are creating n number of objects, why you want to create with a same A and B value? What if I want to try with different thing? It's like constructing n number of houses with the same design. What if you want to construct each house with a different pattern? One house with a three floors, one house with a two rooms, right? Like that, if you want to change your values, if you want to customize it, every object, in that case, we have a concept called as, instance variable. In that case, we have a concept called as instance variable. You know what exactly is an instance variable? So instance variables are the variables which differ for different objects. Okay, they differ for different objects. Usually we define this instance variable not directly, but using init constructor. So constructors are like kind of methods which we use in order to initialize your variables here. We're gonna use init method which helps you in initializing your variables so that every time you create an object, it will expect input from the user. I'll show simple example, just try to understand it. We'll define a same calcium. I'll just say class is equal to calcium. Okay, class is equal to calcium. And instead of defining A equals 10, B equals 20, or instead of using input function, so what I'll do, I'll just define constructor called as define double underscore init double underscore. We call it like a init method. Okay, it's in constructor. So what this init method will do, we all know that whenever we define a function, default parameter is always a self. And I'll define the variable that have to be initialized while creating an object. So it should be A and it should be B. Great. Okay, now what I'll do, I just want to define them. So I'm calling self.a equals A and then I'm calling self.b equals B. So self.a, self.b, they're all variable names. You can give different things as well. And A is a value, B is a value. Okay. Then I'm going to define a method. Method is going to be add and I'll call a self parameter and I'll just say return self.a plus self.b. Okay. So now let me try to create a first calculator. C1 is equal to, I'll just call a calcium. See, when you call your object, so it is expecting two parameters from you. Do you remember when we did the same thing with a class variable? We were not supposed to pass any values while creating an object. But here, while creating an object, you can tell what should be your A value, what should be your B value. That is because of init method. It initializes your object so that it takes variables from user so that each object will have a different variables and it performs in a different way. Okay, same way, I'll create second object, C2 is equal to calci. Again, see, it is expecting values from you. I'll just give a equals 100 and I'll give b equals 20 or 200. Then now you can simply call c1.add. So it just gives you 10 plus 20, which is 30. Similarly, now c2.add will not give you 30, rather it gives you 100 plus 200. This is how instance variables basically helps you in, assigning different values to different objects. So it's like creating different houses with different formats or different patterns or a different plan. So that's where those instance variables plays a very important role. Init method helps you initializing your variables while creating an object. You have to tell which variables has to be initialized. And self is a binding operator. Self basically helps you in accessing your variables inside your methods. Okay. We'll do a few examples. You have to create a Python class named circle with an attributes like radius, and you have to create a method to calculate an area and circumference of a circle. So very simple. Very first thing, since we are dealing with area of a circle and circumference of a circle, I'm just importing math because I want a pi value. And then I'll just define a class. Class name should be circle, right? Okay, great. And it says you have to define a attribute radius. So we'll define instance variable using double underscore in it, double underscore self, and I'll just call it like r for radius. And then call self dot r is equal to r. Done. Then I'll define a method, area. First one is like an area. So how do you find area of a circle? I'll call self and I'll ask it to rate it. So basically area of a circle is pi r square. So I'm trying to call pi using math.pi r square. So you have to call self dot r and I'll put it within a bracket and I'll just, square them. They will asterisk 2. Okay. So, and then similarly, you can define a circumference. Circumference. So circumference of a circle is basically 2 pi r. So 2 times I'll just call math.pi times it should be self.r, 2 pi r, right? Yeah. And now you can create an object which is a circle. I'll just call it like c1 is equal to call your circle. So every time you create an object, it is expecting one parameter, which is a radius. You can give like radius as 2. So now if you call c1.area, it just gives you area of a circle, which is 12 point something. And similarly, you can also call area, that is c1 dot circumference. So like this, you can create any number of circles, and for every circle, you can give a different radius just because of instance variable. Hope it's clear. Great, we'll try with one more. So you have to create a Python class named employee. Okay, class employee with an attributes. It says that name, so let's use instance variable. So we have to give a bonus for different employees, right? So define init underscore. So since we have to give a bonus anyhow it's the same, but 10,000 bonus we are giving, but salaries will be different for every individual, right? So I'm just calling self, I'm calling name, and I'm calling salary, as well as I'm calling job role. Okay, and then it should be self dot name is equal to name, self dot salary is equal to salary, and then it should be self dot role equals role. Okay, then I have to define a method in order to give an increment. So I'll just say raise salary or hike. Let me just call it like a hike, and let me just call self. And then what I'll do, I'll just ask it to return. Let's do some customization format. Okay, so updated salary. So updated salary of, we don't know employee name, so let's just call it like self dot name. Updated salary of, let's say if it's a Jivita, it has to give updated salary of Jivita is, it should be. So self dot salary, I'm just going to call the salary multiplied with, not multiply, we need to give a range, right? It's going to be actual salary plus we're just going to add 10,000 for every salary, right? Yeah. So done. This is how you written updated salary using format F, creating curly braces and calling variables, and also doing calculations, right? Okay, great. Then finally, what I'll do, I'll just try to create a object. So I'll first create for a Jivita. So I'm just calling G object is equal to, I'll just call employee, expecting three parameters. One is name. So I'm just passing Jivita. Second one, let's say 50,000, comma, let's say data scientist. Okay, all right. So let me run this. So now what I'll do, first I'll call G dot name. So clearly it says Jivita. Great. So G dot, let's call salary. Let's 50,000. As is called G dot role, so data scientist, right? So next important thing, I'm just going to call G dot hike. What is the hike even for Jivita? So G dot hike has no attribute hike. Okay, you know why it's not working? Because I didn't follow the proper indentation. That was a dumb mistake, a simple mistake, right? Yeah. So now, initial salary was 50,000. Now the updated salary of a Jivata is 60,000. Make sure you define your methods one below the other. Same indentation should be followed. I hope it's clear. Did you understand? So like this, you can create one more. Let's say for example, you want to create for Mary. So you will call Mary is equal to just call employee of. You can pass a name Mary. You can pass a salary 80,000, comma. You can just pass the role HR. Okay, now instead of Mary, you can just call, I mean, instead of G, you can just call Mary dot name. See, next you can call Mary dot role, HR. So similarly, Mary dot you can call salary. It should be small s. Yeah, so it's 80,000. Now I just want to see the updated salary, so I'll call Mary dot. Right. That's just going to give us 80,000 plus 10,000 is going to be 90,000. So this is what about the class variable and instance variable. So most of the OOPS program we do it with an init. We make it instance so that we can use different variables across different objects. This is all about the class variable which remains same across all the objects. Instance variables various with different objects. Hope it's clear. Thank you. Happy learning.